7_D. I'm coming back to this book, The Impact of Afro-Europeans in the Renaissance of the Middle Ages by Dr. Rufus Jimerson. I'm coming back to this. I'm going to go to page 97 and read a few things. I'm going to tie in a couple things. This one is called, basically going to the Black Autocratic Reign of Europe, 700 to 1848. All right, make sure you can understand. Blacks and progenitors ruled Europe as royals, nobles, and clergymen from the fall of the Roman Empire in 500 to 1848, when parliamentary government abridged the authority of the royals. Their hereditary authority prevailed through the period of African enslavement into the colonization of Africa. During the enslavement period, royals personally hide their Africoid Moorish features with white powders or egg shell mixed to lighten their skin, and wigs to cover their woolly or nappy hair. Yeah, this was done. I forgot what author talked about that. I think it might have been Van Sertima who talked about that in one of his books. Might have been the Golden Age and more. I forget. It was one of those books he talked about. Regardless, the Africoid features were captured in contemporary drawing, paintings, and other imagery. During the 19th century, nationalism made European rule by black Moors and Ottoman Turks unacceptable, and as a motive for the many popular revolution and parliamentary governors reflective of the white ethnic group being governed. During the same century, scientific racism was invented to justify each white ethnic group's alleged higher hierarchical status over so-called lesser ethnicities and races like the blacks. Images of the European royals were quickly whitened to fit ethnocentrism. Right? Perception of the governed. Xenophobia and resentment for the long-held Moorish rule caused a massive suppression of the others' contribution to civilization, as well as their true role in the history of the world. To acquire the truth, researchers must rely on contemporary sources and images closest to events and weed out ethnocentrically falsified images and suppressed accounts of what happens and the role players. By weeding out the falsified images and suppressed accounts, the underlying motive for the Protestant Reformation becomes breaking the absolute rule of the Moorish rule endorsed by the Catholic Church, controlled by the black rulers, family members, for their own lust for power, esteem, and wealth. True accounts and messages of Christ were either destroyed or censored. Parishioners were prohibited from independently and directly reading and interpreting the scripts. In addition, Bibles were written in Latin rather than in a common Indo-European language. The education to read Latin scripts was unavailable to most commoners. Martin Luther, the clergy who led the Protestant Reformation, argued for greater accountability respecting how Christians are ruled by purging the unholy corruption of nobles, buying positions in the church hierarchy, and repentances. By promoting self-determination in respect to reading, interpreting, researching, and translating Christian scriptures, Luther opened the door of inquiry into other intellectual pursuits censored or banned by the Roman Catholic Church. In effect, he and his movement broke the taboo against using Islam accounts, often written in Greek, of the Kemet Nubia hegemony in the ancient world all over knowledge, civilization, religion. In order to fully interpret scriptures, researchers had to rewrite the Bible from its Greek and Hebrew sources. In doing so, they needed the Islamic accounts of the context of the ancient world which it was written. I showed you the image of the Pope the other day with the other video. Pope sitting in his throne. You know, the Pope has like regalia like Osiris. But this is all the original popes are black. So I'm gonna go and continue reading. I'm gonna say a little bit more to that. Martin Luther was described by contemporaries as swarthy. Martin Luther was described by contemporaries as swarthy, which meant one's complexion was black or brown, typical of people of black African lineage. The swarthy description was used from the beginning of the Christian era to the height of the African transatlantic slave trade in the 17th to 18th century to describe black people. They were the any slaves brought over here, but okay. Blacks prior to Christian era were perceived as Ethiopians or Egyptians, Libyans too, and other names. Royals, like Holy Roman Emperor Henry III, were described as having a swarthy complexions. Okay, a contemporary descriptor for black. This emperor was also known as Enrique III, Negro de Alemana, and Henry the Black, Lenore. Numerous Holy Roman emperors were similarly described. The word Negro was created to describe a person living near the Niger River that flows through the heart of Africa. Popes were also described as swarthy and having Africoid or Negro features. I repeat, popes were also described as swarthy and having Africoid or Negro features. I repeat, popes were also described as swarthy and having Africoid or Negro features. For instance, Pope Urban VI was described as swarthy. Rulers of the secular realm like Ludovico Sforza were described as swarthy and known as Moor. Moors were perceived as black or swarthy. Blacks or swarthy person were perceived as Moors, not white, regardless whether they were born in Europe or Africa. His harsh leadership, typical of many Moorish Europeans not connected to identity and needs of the governed, encouraged the French church to rebel. On September 20th, 1378, they chose French Cardinal Robert of Geneva as anti-Pope Clement VII. This partition of the papacy created the Western Schism that became a problem for decades to come. Today, as a result of its African roots, the popes and cardinals bow before a replication of Isis and her rule, worshipped as the Madonna in Christ. To maintain unity in the hegemony of the Moorish nobility in both monarchy and church, interbreed royal Pope Urban II in the Eastern Holy Roman Empire launched the First Crusades. They attempted to rescue the Holy Land from the white Turkish infidels. Here's a bunch of, here's some popes bow down to what you call the Black Madonna, or basically Isis, and a baby. Pope Urban II claimed that the Christians were being harassed, attacked, and banned from churches and holy places. He argued that these infidels were defiling these places. Urban II points out that the holy scapular was turned into a mosque. You see it, showing them bow down to the black image. I'm going to comment here in a few minutes. The unexpected consequences of the series of religious wars in the Holy Lands was that the Crusades brought back, translated, interpreted, and learned about knowledge banned and censored by Europe's ruling class that would change their worldview. They were exposed to many cultures and acquired an international appetite respecting foods and spices, deodorants, perfumes, colognes, alcoholic beverages, garbs, etc. They could only be fulfilled by reopening trade routes. They would have to learn how to advance their art of warfare and protect the trade. These innovations would lead to the exploration of new lands, importation of raw materials, and the trade and commerce to facilitate the Renaissance. Age of Enlightenment, Industrial Age, global hegemony, and advanced modern civilization. To do so, it became necessary to challenge and break the orthodoxy imposed by the absolute rule of the Moorish monarchy and church, spurring the Protestant Reformation. 100 years and the 30 Years' War that seriously depopulated the labor force on the continent. To afford these expensive costs, European nations faced the dilemma of raising taxes at exorbitant rates and incurring the wrath of taxpayers who were demanding a parliamentary government with a limited monarchy, which could not make such demands without the consent of the citizenry. To the otherwise, the Moorish monarchs faced a growing nationalistic insurgency to oust them like they did with the Roman Catholic Church. Alright, I'm going to stop there. Alright, I'm going to stop there and I'm going to emphasize something. Go back to this one point. Uh, go back to this one point because I want to emphasize this. And as says this part that I read here. What's this part? Okay. Part I read here. Okay, let me get it clear. Okay. Popes were also described as swarthy and having Africoid and Negro features. Okay. When you study so-called black history, because I've been doing this for years, when you was told as a kid, because there's one time they was going to have elected so-called, they was going to elect the so-called, one of the popes who was being considered was going to be this African guy. I forgot what country. And people are going to say, oh, he's the first African pope. And they corrected, oh, it's the first black pope in 1,000 years. I said, okay. They hear these niggas talking about, yeah, 3 African popes from North Africa. All the popes were originally black, starting with Saint Sylvester I. All the popes were originally black. All of them were originally black. That's not up for debate. All of them were originally black, but so-called black people dominated Europe. Remember, you hear about the stuff how the black people came in Europe in 7-11 with the Moorish invasion. No, black people were already there ruling Europe. You have to understand this. The original people in Europe were Negroes in the first place. Caucasian people, or who we know now as Caucasian people, originate from Central Asia. They did not originate in Europe. Europe is even named after a black goddess, Europa, a black woman. Now, I read that and I went back to that because I want to emphasize how it said that even into the 19th century, which is the mid-1800s, you still have black rulership, that black lineage in many of these countries. And you did. And then a lot of these Negroes were hiding their blackness and putting on all this powder and this damn makeup on their face to whiten their image and to hide their physical features. Now, I want to say this. I believe, and I read this with the author the other day, that's what a lot of the white folks' aggression towards us. It goes back to us ruling over them in Europe, controlling them in Europe, being the ones in power, being the master while they was the servants in Europe. And I told you, all those goddamn castles were built by Negroes. A lot of these fools know this. Because the Negroes had the technology to build them. And this also acknowledging the fact that these people are all black also breaks down to the culture, the dancing, the music. Classical music was created by Negroes. It was created by the so-called black Moors who ruled damn Europe. And to me, classical music, even though it's different, it has some similarities, I think. Jazz has some kind of closeness to it. I know it's different, but it has some closeness to it. Classical music was originated by the Negroes over in Europe. That is a black art form too. Which white folks, you see the majority of it, but classical music comes from Negroes. And I think I talked about in that book, Ancient Modern Britons, was sort of kind of play on that. But I emphasized and I read this about the black Europeans, is that the fact once they started losing their power, where the hell did they go? They all did not die off. I told you before, some may went into Asia, some went to Africa, North and West Africa, but many came to the Americas, man. This is I'm handing you. This is like you in football, you hand it off to the running back. I'm handing this information. So when you ever hear people tell you that we just came over here, the slave ships, many of those black people were being expelled, stopped off in certain parts of Africa, and they came here to the Americas. So when you talk, like I said in my other video the other day, so when you talk this stuff that, oh, you come from Africa, actually, many of them Negroes came from the British Isles, from Scotland, from Ireland, and all those countries from the European, British Isles countries, and they came over here to the Americas, mixed in with the black Indian groups here. Because it was constantly traveling, going back and forth. You had black Indian image of America, statues of them in Europe. How the hell you had that? The information's there, but you're going to have to work to seek it. That's why I kept saying 1618, 1648, 1618, 1648. That was one of the wars that helped basically to push out the black population ruling Europe. 1618 and 1648, that's a 30-year war. 1619 was the first time so-called slaves came here. How can that be? When 1618 and 1638, that's when many of these black folks are being pushed out of there. During that was the 30-year war. They also had a 100-year war. Black people were warring amongst ourselves and then these growing white fractions. So if you look at a lot of these History Channel stuff, they'll tell you they always portray the blacks as hired mercenaries and the white folks as leaders. Actually, the other way around. But when you study history and you start studying, getting more in depth with the history, you will see that how much we've been lied to about our true history. And this is why it's so important that we can't just sit up there and say we're slaves from Africa. That information is inaccurate. It really is. It is for us now to really take the time and to study our true history, to study who we really are. And people get offended by when we talk about this, but the information is there, but you're going to have to seek it and study it. You're going to have to seek it and study it. Our people are great people. You're not saying you're great when you sit up there and look for an imaginary tribe that you're supposed to be linked to over in Africa. And it sounds like you feel that you don't have no culture, so you in order to you take this DNA test, and that's how you find yourself over some tribe over in Africa when your culture's here in America. It's where your people at. Ancient black culture in America, as well as black nobility culture in Europe. Remember I read talking about priests, nobles, and all that stuff. Remember I showed you before how Saint Pete was black. How the real origin of the quote Catholic Church was Negro. And then you look at a lot of those dome designs that you find in every state capitol building. They stole that from the Aboriginal blacks here. Your history, like I always says, in your face, man. It is literally in your face. But we're going to have to take the time to study this history. It's in your face, brothers and sisters. It's in your face. Alright? This is the book I read again for. It's called The Impact of the Afro-Europeans in the Renaissance of the Middle Ages. It's a good book by Dr. Rufus Jimerson. Alright, peace and love, brothers and sisters.